Cambridge has been the site of political, religious, and social historic events for nearly 350 years. And the Cambridge Common has been the home of some of the most important history that has shaped our nation. Freedom of speech was declared at Cambridge Common in 1637, freedom of religion in 1740, and George Washington took command of the First Continental Army there in 1775. But amongst all of the statues and monuments to history, there remains a glaring omission. The Prince Hall Memorial Committee has been established to erect a monument on the Common that will pay homage to an important abolitionist voice that helped shape civil rights in this country.
Prince Hall was a Boston man, born in 1738. He was very active in the abolition movement even before the Revolution, petitioned the Massachusetts legislature to end the slave trade, was a founder of the first Masonic Lodge for blacks in 1775, and also in 1775 petitioned General Washington to allow blacks to serve in the American Army. He was not directly connected to Cambridge in the sense that he was not a Cambridge resident, but at that time, at the time of the Revolution, there were about 70 blacks, mostly slaves, but not entirely, living in Cambridge. The center of that community was in Boston, and he was certainly engaged. A small enough community that everyone knew each other and that people in leadership positions would easily cross town lines and gain respect in other communities.
Well, you have to think of a couple things. One is the population is much smaller in the mid 18th century, although Medford was a well-developed town, as was Cambridge at the time. It would not have been uncommon for some of the people enslaved here to be sent on errands or to transact business in other towns.
Some of the business that Prince Hall engaged in was to speak against many of the injustices that befell people of color in Massachusetts. He was the first black man to call on the legislature to abolish slavery. He also used his voice to petition on behalf of a slave named Belinda, who worked at the Royal House Plantation in Medford.
The Royals were large slaveholders in the 18th century, basically from about 1737 to the beginning of the American Revolution in 1775. One of the enslaved Africans that they held at that time for a long period was a woman named Belinda. Does not have a last name, which is quite common for the period. After the Royals fled to England, since they were loyalists, Belinda, like many of the people here, became destitute. And after the abolishment of slavery in Massachusetts in 1783, she petitioned the Massachusetts legislature for a pension, basically saying, I worked for free for 40 years, I deserve a pension for my labors. Historians speculate, with some evidence, that Prince Hall was among the people helping Belinda advance this petition to the legislature. Belinda was not literate, did not know how to write, and the petition is a wonderful, very stirring piece of rhetoric and persuasive rhetoric from the 18th century, with some characteristic flourishes, shall we say, and styles from Prince Hall.
Among the various petitions that Prince Hall authored was one to General George Washington, where he petitioned the general to allow blacks to serve in the newly formed American Army.
We don't know actually where Washington entertained Prince Hall, but I think it's probably a stretch to say that Prince Hall walked up to him on Cambridge Common and said, how about this? I think it must have been a more formal setting. General Washington was Commander-in-Chief of the American Army. He would have been pretty closely guarded, and I think that would have had to have been arranged in advance. But it's really not material, I think. The Cambridge Common is where important people and events are commemorated. And it's the location where the American Army gathered, where the Minutemen gathered to form the American Army. So it's the appropriate location.
Prince Hall is most widely known as the founder of the first Masonic Lodge for blacks.
First of all, Prince Hall had petitioned. There were two other lodges in Massachusetts, white lodges. Prince Hall had petitioned those White Lodges for membership, and they denied him. I guess the White Lodges felt as though that they didn't want to have a slave or a servant in the same lodge with them. So that's why Prince Hall was denied membership in those two lodges. March of 1775, Prince Hall and 14 other men of color approached a Mason that belonged to an Irish lodge and asked this person if they could petition to become Masons. So on March 6, 1775, Prince Hall and those 14 men of color traveled to Castle William Island, where they were made Masons by Sergeant Batt of the Irish Constitution, Irish Lodge number 441. Prince Hall, once he was made a Mason, and the Irish had left Massachusetts, that's when he had started African Lodge number 1. African Lodge number 1 was formed on July 3rd, 1776, a day before this country was formed.
Prince Hall died in 1807, and the name of the lodge was changed to Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts in his honor. For Prince Hall, abolitionist, civil rights activist, and the founder of the Black Freemasons, a monument on the Cambridge Common will be a fitting tribute to an important voice in our nation's history.